All right, so we're starting at the Mishnah. Mishnah 40b. Va'al davar she'ein gidulo min haaretz. So if you have something that does not grow from the ground, Omer, shakol nihiyeh bidvaro. So the bracha we recite is shahakol. Shahakol. Now again, literally translated shahakol nihiyeh bidvaro, that everything was created with his word. Ala chometz. Chometz is vinegar. Novlos. We'll define in the Gemara exactly what novlos are. Va'al govai. Govai are locusts. Interesting, we know that halacha l'maisa there's certain types of grasshoppers, certain type of locusts that are kosher. So in all of these things, Omer shakol niyeh bidvaro. So in all of these items, the bracha that we recite is the bracha of shahakol. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol shu min klala in mevarchan alav. Rabbi Yehuda says anything in general. This is actually an interesting formulation. This is anything that is a min klala, which literally means anything that is either the result of something destructive or ultimately a destructive force itself. One does not say a bracha on it at all. Now, what does that mean? So this would come to include, for example, chometz, vinegar, novlos, which we haven't defined exactly what they are just yet. Govai are locusts. So here's what's interesting. So chometz represents something that's spoiled. Right? On the other hand, govai, locust, represents something that destroys. So Rabbi Yehuda is coming along and saying anything that is what we call a min klala, anything that ultimately, again, either is a form of spoilage or is in and of itself a destructive force, one does not recite a bracha on it at all. How you lefan of min in harbe? Let's say again you had in front of you many different types of food. So what's the halacha? So I will say, now this actually is an interesting discussion in Hilchos Brachos. Generally, you have like a whole bunch of food items in front of you. Which one should you make the bracha on? So Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Im yesh beineim min shiva, alav hu mevarech. Rabbi Yehuda says, well, if amongst the food items you have are the shiva saminim, the 7 species unique and indigenous to Eretz Yisrael, chita, saora, geth, and te'ena, shemen, right, zayis, Divash. So ultimately, again, zeis shemen udvash, right? So olives and dates. So what's the halacha? Mavarich halav. So ultimately, alav mavarich. Yehuda says shiva saminim has precedence, and that's what you make the bracha on. The chum say no mavarich al eizim and shir. So the chum say no, you make a bracha on whichever one you want. So this is actually an interesting machlokes in general. We're going to see this in the Gemara about when deciding the hierarchy of brachas. How do you decide that? Is hierarchy decided on personal preference? Or is hierarchy decided based on some type of objective level of importance? Okay, so we'll see in the Gemara. Shall I say, let's analyze this. So the first klal that the Mishnah, the first principle that the Mishnah espoused was the idea of davar she'ein gidulo min haaretz. If you have something that doesn't grow from the ground, then you make the bracha of shahakol. So watch this. So Tanarabban, the Gemara teaches al davar she'ein gidulo min haaretz kigon baser behemus chayos va'ofos v'dagim omer shakol nihiyeh bidvaro. So here the Brisa gives an example on anything that doesn't grow from the ground. For example, meat, the meat of animals, the meat of domesticated animals, undomesticated animals, fowl, fish. In all of these things, you say shahakol niyeh bidvaro. Okay, ala chalav, ala beitzim, milk and eggs, ala grina and cheese. Omer shahakol. So again, these are all examples of things that do not grow from the ground. Ala pasha ifsha. This is interesting. Moldy bread, or yayin shehikrim, or wine that has turned, or on a food that is spoiled. Omer shahakol. You make the bracha of shahakol. Now this is also very interesting. This idea of making a bracha on spoiled foods. So you must be talking about a situation where even though there was, we'll talk about this more, but it sounds like even though there's spoilage, so ultimately again it's still edible, right? So for example, we know this, like moldy bread. Moldy bread was the major ingredient in a Talmudic favorite dish, so many times Daf Yomi, called kusach. Right, kusach was a dip that was made out of moldy bread as the primary ingredient. So apparently in these situations where even though the item itself is not in its primary form, there's some level of spoilage that is set in, you still say shahakol. Ala melech v'ala azamis, on salt or on salt water. Al kimhin upitrios, on mushrooms and truffles. Mushrooms and truffles, omer shahakol. Okay, so I'll say, so pretty much this, whereas as opposed to the Mishnah, which really just articulates a principle that if something doesn't grow from the ground, you say shahakol niyeh bidvaro, the Brisa is a bit more specific, right? And the Brisa goes through, ultimately, again, all of these different items. Now, what intrigues the Gemara is mushrooms and truffles. Yeah. Right? Why? What are you bothered by? Lememra. The kimenu pitchos lav gidulei karka. What do you mean? So mushrooms and truffles don't grow from the ground? Vatanya, we learn. Listen to this. Totally separate discussion. Hanodrim peros haaretz, asar peros haaretz, umutar bekimenu pitchos. So let's listen to this. Let's say I make a neder. Right? And my neder is, I will not eat from fruit of the ground, or things that grow from the ground. So what's ta'alacha? You are prohibited as a result of your neder from eating any fruits that grow from the ground, but you are permitted to eat mushrooms and truffles. Listen to this. V'im amar kol gidulei karka alai aser. But if you said anything that grows from the ground, so you're saying peros haaretz, and things that grow from the ground, then aser af bekimenu pitros. So you're not even allowed to eat mushrooms and truffles. So what's going on? So says, how do you reconcile that? So which one is it? Do mushrooms and truffles grow from the ground or not? To which the Gemara says a very interesting answer. The Gemara says, Amar Abaye, mirba rabu me'ara, menak lo yanki me'ara. So interestingly enough, Abaye says mushrooms and truffles, they grow, ultimately again attached to the ground. But they do not receive their nourishment or nutrients from the ground. So we'll say, so we know this. For example, when you pick a mushroom, right, so there's no root, right? There's no root system that's there. So ultimately, again, they grow from spores in the air. So they attach themselves to the ground, but yet ultimately, again, don't grow from the ground. So interestingly enough, so first, in the world of Nedarim, so if a person makes a neder saying, I am not going to partake of peros haaretz, fruits of the ground, so remember again, in the whole chap by Nedarim, is Nedarim vows go after Lashon Bnei Adam, go after the way people speak. When people speak about peros haaretz, what are they referring to? Things that are nourished from the ground. So therefore, if you use that verbiage for a neder, you are still allowed to eat mushrooms and truffles. However, interestingly enough, if you talk about gidulei karka, things that grow from the ground include things that are nourished and things that are attached. And therefore, again, mushrooms and truffles are attached even though they're not nourished. To come full circle, so what does our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah says, this halacha l'maisa. The bracha on mushrooms is shackle. Right? The bracha on mushrooms is shackle. Right? Why? Because l'maisa, again, even though they grow attached to the ground, ultimately, again, they do not receive their nourishment from the ground. So a very interesting halacha. Okay, let's go weiter. Says the Gemara. Okay, I just lost it. That's good. Val novlos. And on novlos, so also the Mishnah said, on novlos, you also make a shahakol niyeh bidvaros. The Gemara says, $1 million question. My novlos. By the way, what are novlos? So the Gemara is supposed to say, interesting machlokes. Rabbi Zeva, Rabbi Eloi, Chad Amar Bushli Karma, the Chad Amar Tamri Dezeka. So machlokes, one opinion said Bushli Karma. If you look at Rashi says over here, Bushli Karma, Kimos Rufe Chamo. This refers to dates burnt by the sun. In other words, they're dried out dates. So some say novelos are dried out dates. The Chad Amar Tamri Dezeka. Others say it's dates that were blown off the tree by the wind. Okay? See, either way, what's the chap over here? What's the common denominator between these two opinions? Is right, correct. They've been changed and they're inferior, right? So whether it's been left on the tree for too long and therefore dried out, or it was blown off the tree by the wind, and as a result, it's been on the earth, it's been in the dirt, it's been in the mud. The point over here is it's not the same quality of product. So machlokes. So the Gemara says as follows: Rabbi Yehuda says, "Kol shumin klala im mevarchen alav." So Rabbi Yehuda says like this. Well, so Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah said, anything that is what he called min klala. So min klala, again, Rashi defined as either something itself of compromised quality or something that is quote unquote destroyed or something that destroys, like locust. So according to the opinion that says that novlos are really burnt by the sun, dates that are dried out, burnt by the sun, so it makes sense why the Mishnah would call them min klala, right? A destroyed item. My min klala, but according to the opinion that says that it's dates that are blown off the tree by the wind, so why is that called a min klala? Okay, I got it. Maybe they're a little bit dirty, so you wash it off. In other words, the date itself could still be totally fine. To which the Gemara says, you're right, asha'ara. You're right. When it says min klala, it's referring to the other items in the list, not the novlos. Okay. Igadami, an alternate version of this. According to so it works according to the opinion that says that it's dried out dates burnt by the sun. That's why I make a bracha of shakol. I'll say, but if you hold that novlos are dates blown off the tree by the wind, then why are you saying a shahakol? It should still get a bracha of what? Ta'etz. And I will say, if you have dates that are blown off the tree by the wind, I understand that maybe it's a little bit compromised, but it's still a date, right? It's still a bona fide fruit. So why would there be any kind of problem with this? The Gemara goes right. The Gemara says, you're right. So I'm sorry. Bari praetz mi bari lebruche. Ella benovlos stama. So the Gemara says something very interesting. The Gemara says, in general, whenever you see the term novlos, right, unqualified novlos, novlos means sunburned dates. That's what it means. So kipli, so we'll say, so where is the machlokas? Benovlos tamra. When you see that lashon of novlos tamra. So again, when you just see stam novlos means sunburned dates. When you see novlos tamra, then there's a machlokes. What exactly does that mean? This not. Here we go. Hakolin shebedmai. So we'll say, interestingly enough, the items that are treated in a Mekel, Rashi says over here, Hakolin shebedmai. Peros sheikalu chachamim b'demai shalahen shalochan me'am haaretz in tzarich lasan. So we'll say, so quick outside halacha. We know that there is halacha called demai. What's the halacha of demai? So remember again that halacha l'maisa, when you buy produce, you have to tithe it. Okay. Now the assumption is, if I buy produce from you, right? I buy produce right from Stam Jew. I assume that Stam Jew properly tithes his produce. So the Gzera of Demai said, Amei ha'aretz, often, again, ignorant Jews don't know the halachos of tithing. As such, you have to assume that their produce is untithed. Because you have to assume that it is untithed, therefore what? You are obligated to tithe it again. However, there are some things that are of such inferior quality that we assume that they're tithed. So the Gemara says, Akalin shebedmai. So what are the things that we could be makel with? What are the things that we could be lenient with when it comes to demai? And assume that even an Amma Aretz properly tithe them. So hashisin, v'harimin, v'ozdirin. So we'll say these are all types of fruits. All different types of fruits. So the shisin, Rashi defines all of them. We're just going to go through the list. The shisin, the rimin, the ozdirin, benos shuach, benos shikma, gufnin, v'natzpa, v'novlos tamra. So we'll say, see here, the whole reason you brought this up is because the Gemara is pointing out over here, here's that expression. So up until now, we were focusing on novlos. Now we say, no. Everyone agrees that novlos are sunburned dates. The machlokes is, what is the definition of novlos tamra? So Gemara says, shisin, what are shisin? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan, min te'enim. It's a type of fig. Rimin, kandi, ozradin, tulshi. Benos shuach, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, te'eni chiyurta, white figs. Benos shikma, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, duvli gufanin. Shilhi, guvnei natzba, caperberry, percha, gufnei nitzba, percha, novlos tamra. What is novlos tamra? So also again, remember, all of this is just to get to this definition. What is novlos tamra? Rabbi Zera, chad amar bushlei karma, v'chad amar tamri dezeka. So we'll say, there it is. There's the machlokes. So again, when it comes to novlos, stam, just that term, everyone is going to agree that novlos means sunburned dates. When you have novlos tamra, that's where there is a machlokes. Is novlos tamra ultimately, again, is that considered to be sunburned dates, or is that considered to be wind-blown dates? That's the machlokes. The Gemara says like this. So bishlama, we'll say three lines from the bottom. Let's just finish up the Amud. So bishlama leman da'amar bushlei karma hainu diktani akalon shebedimai sveikan hu depater. Havadoin chayim. So we'll say, so listen to this. So according to the opinion that says that novlos tamra are sunburned dates, so then that makes sense to say that if you have these items are treated a little bit more leniently when it comes to demai, and therefore their suffix is going to be potter. So the Gemara says, what do you see from here? That if you have a vandai situation, it would be chayiv ultimately again for meiser alman da'amar tamri dezeka vada and chayiv. But I will say, if you hold that it's windswept dates, and you want to say that again, windswept dates ultimately again, if you knew that they weren't tithed, you would be obligated to go out and tithe them again. How could that be? The Gemara says chayiv. So the Gemara says hefkerin inhu. Well, this is very interesting. What's the status of dates blown off from the tree? Generally, the status is that they are hefker. They're hefker. Right? Because the assumption is if it's blown off the tree, then the owner despaired of really ever getting it, and therefore halacha might be hefker. I will say very important halacha. Hefker produce is pater from Shemos and Maestros. There's no tithing obligations by hefker produce. So what's going on? So the Gemara says, no. Hachama askinon. What's the case over here? Sha'asa'an goren. So we'll say, could very well be that the case over here is where you took the dates that were blown off the tree, and what did you do? You made them into a pile. Now, what is making them into a pile? Do look at Rashi. Sha'asa'an goren. Ha'ani omishalaktan ha'amid mehen arimas kri. So I say, so what happens? Halach l'maisa, the ani or whoever it is that's collecting these dates took them and made them into a pile. I will say a very important agricultural fact or detail over here, which is that halacha l'maisa in the field. So the gathering process, or I should say, right, the harvesting process is considered to be complete when you put something in a pile. So if an ani, so as much as hefker produce is generally it's tax exempt, you don't take trumas and ma'asos from it. However, if the ani gathers up, let's say leket shicha and peah, one of the tithes for the poor, and he puts it in a pile, that act of putting it in a pile makes it bona fide produce. Making it bona fide produce triggers the tithing obligation. So it could be that the case over here is where the ani took dates that were blown off the tree, which by themselves would have been hefker. Now the ani takes them, puts them in a pile. Once he puts them in a pile, suddenly they become chayiv in trumas and maestros. The Marzukva likes it. Fine, so we'll say no, to stop over here. Actually, just finish up. Igidami, other say, both at top of Memalef, quickly, 41a, Bishalaman, there are Tamri Dezek, Hainu Dahachi, Kari Luhu, Novlo Stama, Bahasam Karle Tamra. So it's according to the opinion that says that ultimately, again, that novlos are windswept dates. That makes sense why he calls it here novlos and why he calls it over there tamra. Elamand amr boshle karmaninhu idi v'idi novlos tamra or idi v'idi novlos tama. But if you hold that a sunburned date, then use the same term to describe it in both places. To which the Gemara says kasha inachinami. That is a good question. So we'll say, so bottom line, for our purposes, Mishnah says you make a shahakal on novlos. What are novlos? One of two possibilities, either sunburned dates or dates blown off the tree. Either way, they have compromised quality, and therefore the Mishnah Paskins, you only make a shahakal. Bosai shkoyach.